Thank you, Bree. Oh my goodness, welcome, welcome. We already started jumping into this conversation because there's so much to talk about. Hello, I'm Sherry Richert Belul, author of Say It Now, 33 Creative Ways to Say I Love You to the Most Important People in Your Life. And I'm so excited to have Kim, Jocelyn, Dickson here and John Duffy. And we are looking at empty nest. We're looking at transitions. We're looking at parenting and teenagers and COVID. And just a tiny backstory of why this right now for me personally is that I dropped my son off to move out a few weeks ago, had posted about it on Facebook, and within a few hours just had hundreds of comments from people who were telling their stories about not just the empty nest sadness, but their teenager who was growing away from them, their teenager who was scared to go back to high school because of COVID, dropping their kids at kindergarten. Every step of the way, there's a transition. And I just saw people really wanted to talk about this. And we happen to have these two wonderful authors and experts here to share with us. So we're going to start with, I'll have each of you just introduce yourselves and tell us why you do what you do. And maybe just if you want to talk a little bit about, how this idea of transitions is showing up in your work right now. So Kim, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, my name's Kim Jocelyn Dickson. I'm the author of The Invisible Toolbox, The Power of Reading to Your Child from Birth to Adolescence. And the book came about for me after, I think it's been about 31 years of teaching in the elementary school, from the Midwest to the East Coast to the West Coast, in both public and private schools, and observing children and what they come to school with in terms of how ready they are for what school has to offer. And I've been a lifelong reader and have always loved books myself. And so I think that the idea for my book came about pretty naturally based upon my own love of reading, as well as what I've learned over these years of teaching. And so my book is essentially a gift book for parents about how important it is to begin reading and speaking to our children from the very beginning, in terms of nurturing them emotionally, nurturing them in terms of their neurodevelopment, because neuroscientists are sharing with us so much concretely through their research about what happens when children are read to. So it really just grows out of my heart for wanting children to have everything that they need in order to thrive, not only in school, but beyond school, because I do believe that when we develop a love of reading with children, it can carry them far beyond school into their lives. So that's kind of in a nutshell where my heart is at this point. So you asked to speak about transitions, and I guess I would just add to that I think in some mysterious way, reading helps us through transitions, because reading has to do with connection. So that's all I'll say about that.
I'm going to talk to you more about that in a little while too, because I do think that's such an important point. Yeah. Thank you so much. So beautiful. Hi, John. Welcome back.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Same question. Why are you doing what you're doing?
Okay. So first of all, Kim, I can't wait to read your book, because that whole idea of cementing reading in the mind of children when they are young and getting them to love that, and having books become their friends as they go through the years where I see them, adolescence and beyond, creates this foundation of like competence and resilience that is like second to none. So I suspect you've written something that is invaluable, and I'll be getting a copy. I hope everybody watching us is. I am a clinical psychologist. I have been doing therapy with families, teens, tweens for 25 years or so. Kim, we've both been on our jobs for too long. And there are patterns that I notice that recur in the families that I see. And oftentimes parents are almost wholly unaware of what's going on in the minds and the lives of their teens and their tweens. And so I wrote a book basically tackling issue by issue, the kinds of things you're going to run into through these years that you might be wholly unaware of and that you as a teen or tween might not have ever had to go through. Social media being an example, maybe the prime example, but there are dozens that we could tap into. And I suppose if there's a thread here, it's about connection, because in the end, the solution to virtually every issue that I bring up in my book is about maintaining a strong connection between yourself and your child. And if you can, that doesn't mean perfection, but if there is a foundation of a strong connection where you're an ally and a guide and a consultant to your child, things are going to work far more smoothly, not just now, but to everybody's point here, Sherry, maybe yours in particular, from giving your story, well into the adult years. You know, I've got a 25-year-old, and I am fortunate enough to say, you know, like he and I are still super close, and our relationship has evolved because I think I've been able to maintain some of that availability that I so hope parents can put their fears aside to be available, to stay connected with their kids. That's where all the joy is in parenting too.
Oh, I love that. I'm so, you know, it's so encouraging to hear, you know, of course, about all the work you do. And I love your book and both books. Bree has put the links in the chat. Thank you, Bree, because they are both just so wonderful. And I love that connection, right? Connection, being the connection between the work you're doing. And so I wanted to start because I pulled a snippet from each of your books that I thought would prompt something that I particularly wanted to know about, but I'm hoping will be really helpful for everyone. So John, I'm going to start with you. And it was the part where you were talking about the new late teen. And you said, we're going to find that the teen designation is no longer entirely valid, certainly not the way it's been used historically. And then you talked about, you know, how children are growing up faster, they're entering those teen years much earlier. And then you also said, we're witnessing a prolonged adolescence on the back end as our young adults remain stifled by the overwhelming load of information, emotion, identity confusion that they're processing in their teen years. They remain unclear about their place in the world well into their 20s. And again, this is what you call the new late teen. And that really struck me, especially in light of, you know, how as parents, when we're sending these teens, the new late teens off into the world, especially the COVID world, you know, already full of anxiety, and they may be much younger in certain ways emotionally, they might be overwhelmed. John, what do we do with this?
Well, first of all, yeah, to be clear about the phenomenon, you're exactly right. Whereas a generation ago, I think legitimately the teen years felt like they spanned between about 13 and 19, give or take a year or two. Now, the late teen does stretch into the 20s, because if you think about what the conflict is that needs to be resolved over the course of adolescence, it's developing a strong sense of self, separate and apart from mom and dad. And that sense of self has to include some elements of competence and resilience. And when you have so much data available to you at the, you know, literally at the tip of your fingers all the time, and you're carrying kind of the weight of the world on your shoulders. So you're no longer just the egocentric teen that I think we've always pictured teenagers being, but we're actually far more worldly at 17, 18, 19 years old than maybe even developmentally we're prepared to be. And so we feel like, wow, I should know what my place in the world is by now. I worked with a young woman yesterday who felt this way. She's 19 years old, and she felt like, I'm way behind my peers because everyone knows the big contribution they're going to make, and I don't know that contribution. And we need to give our kids, our young adults, permission not to know, permission to still be investigating and figuring out who they are and where they belong in the world. So that is crucial. And I really want parents to keep that in mind. You know, like we put all this pressure on kids to, by the sophomore or junior year in college or whatever they're up to know like what does the layout of your life look like? And that's way too much to take on for somebody at that age right now. And it drives a whole lot of anxiety that oftentimes gets young people to retreat from their lives as opposed to engaging in them. So there's a real risk there of kind of arresting that development and them stepping all the way back and just kind of climbing into bed, especially when you've got a pandemic going on and bed comes very easily.
Wow. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Can I jump in and ask a question here of John? John, do you feel that, I mean, there's been such a drastic change in terms of child rearing and culture. You know, I've been around for such a long time, but I was part of that free range childhood experience where we had so much time apart from our parents that wasn't parent directed. And I'm just so struck today by, many of my students that don't have that freedom. They haven't grown up into that. More of their experiences are virtual. It seems like they're all either virtual or adult directed. And so how do they develop a sense of resilience and independence in that little bubble? Ooh, do you think that's part of the problem?
Yes, such a great question, Kim. And you're right. So much of the lives of our young people takes place via screens like we're looking at now, and not really directly engaging. And so you're right, parents have this opportunity to direct their kids' lives through a screen. I mean, there are portals to look at for grades. There are, we can track our kids, and I work with parents who do this all the way through the college years, like, oh, he or she is not in class right now. They're still at their dorm. I better ping them and make sure they get, as opposed to letting our kids run a little more free range, make a few mistakes, but live independently of us to some extent, right? Because parenting is very much a verb now. And I am a little bit older, and my son is 25. And I think we were on the front edge of raising kids who were just moving from that free range to that over-controlled parent state, right? And I think if we cheat back the other way just a little bit, I think we're creating more opportunity for competence and resilience. It's scary for parents though, because all of a sudden we're relinquishing a whole lot of parental control, and we're saying, you know what, you're probably going to make some mistakes that I could help you avoid if I could just watch you on the screen. But that's not the point of parenting. While our kids are young, this is when we want them to learn all the things, right? We don't want this to happen when they're out there in the world and the stakes are super high. If they learn the things now and they manage the difficult times now, they'll know later on that they can do that. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. And Kim, I think you were a little bit psychic in that, because I want to read what I chose from your book, and then I'll tell you why. But I think it's directly connected to what you're just talking about with John. So in The Invisible Toolbox, Kim says, human beings are wired to connect. From the cradle to the grave, the evidence is in that the deepest human desire after life itself is the longing to connect. We enter the world seeking it, and if we leave this world with any regrets, it's primarily because we did not love well or deeply. The blueprint for connection is written in our cells from the very beginning, and our understanding of this has enormous implications for the way we parent. And exactly, right? So we're talking about connection, but my question has to do with, we've swung over to this Uber connection, right? And so we'll start with Kim, and then John, I'm sure you can jump in, but it's like, as parents, how do we learn to disconnect? What do we do?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's quite a leap from that to disconnecting. I'll have to think about that. But I guess what occurs to me, Sherry, is that when there is a genuine connection, between the parent and the child, when there is that security, then those leave takings can happen maybe a little more gracefully because the security is already there. Does that make sense? It's kind of ironic, but I think it's true that, you know, the child, whether it's going off to kindergarten, whether it's going into high school or college or away from home, if they know in the back of their mind or down deep that there is a solid connection there, I think that can help reduce the anxiety. And by connection, I don't, you know, of course, what I'm not talking about in the book is over involvement. It's genuinely being present for that little being that has come into the world. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question of you, Kim?
Yes. Sure.
So that we may as well, we'll trade these back and forth. That leave taking that you talk about, I think a lot of parents that I work with would say, ooh, that feels like abandonment to me. That feels, you know, like I'm not doing my job as a parent. I'm not connecting it in the way that I'm supposed to. And all you experts say I should be connecting. Do you have a thought about that? Like, you know, that stepping away and whether that's—
Yeah, well, I think there's just no getting around. There are going to be difficult feelings. I don't know there's any way for us as parents to completely let go of our anxiety and our worries. I don't know that there is. I think that's just part of separation and letting go. I think there's pain involved in that. But I guess I do think that, you know, if we know that we've given our child the best that we were able to give them when we were able to give it, that they're going to be okay. And I think too, it's like a gift to have faith in your child. That's something else that we can give them. As hard as it is to let go, it's really about letting them know that we trust them, that they are going to be okay. None of it's easy. It's just not. Wouldn't it be great if it were?
I love what you just said, Kim. I wrote it down because it touched me so deeply. It's a gift to have faith in our children. And it's true. It's a gift to them. And I was thinking it's also a gift to ourselves, right? To have that. And I want to circle back to what Christy had brought up right before we started recording, which was, so about this phenomenon. And I know, John, you talked about this too, and you address it in your book about these students who are going off to college. And then I know you quoted, I think it was 30%, John, was that right? So 30% coming home their freshman year before the holidays.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm finding that, oh yeah, go ahead. It sounds like you might have.
Well, so I'm just thinking, like, again, we're trying to balance this. We're trying to balance like having faith in our children and trusting that they're going to be okay. But also we're up against these statistics that we all know in normal times, not even pandemic times, that they're coming home because it's too much. They can't handle it. They weren't prepared. We don't know, you know what, but yeah. So can you tell us about that piece?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's less incongruous than it might at first appear to be, because I think the earlier we show our kids that we have faith in their abilities to make it through whatever it is, including, I suppose the most insidious present example is, an academic year that is not very clear in terms of how it's going to go pandemic wise. And this is kind of the third now academic year in a row where we can say that's a question mark. To let our kids know that we have confidence in them from an early age, I think makes them a little more inoculated to that first semester in college difficulty, where I think a lot of kids feel very quickly like the floor has fallen out from underneath them and they have no tools. So they feel some degree of anxiety. Social connections don't come as easily as they thought. They are not having the time of their lives when, in fact, they've been fed this idea that these are going to be the greatest years of your life and you're going to make great friends right away. And this doesn't typically happen exactly the way we're kind of selling kids a bill of goods. And when it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen quickly, if we haven't created enough of that resilience and that competence, some of those kids are going to feel like, you know what, I can't make it through this. I cannot handle this. And they've got to come home, regroup, come to see people who do what I do, and then go back out in the world. It's not like, there are no solutions, but if we tackle this early, I think we can avoid some difficulties later. And part of that is showing our kids that confidence in them earlier in life rather than later.
Kim, did you want to? Oh, Kim, and then Christy. Did you have anything, Kim, that you wanted to add?
No, I guess I was just thinking about, my own work in terms of what you just said. I think that it's like building that toolbox ahead of time is really so important for kids to have that to draw on once they do take those steps of independence.
Yeah. Christy, did you want to jump in? You're muted though. You have to unmute.
There, I unmute. Is that okay? Yeah, I found in a lot of my statistics though, even with the best parents who are trusting their kids read signals. Right? You must both find this. They read signals from their parents. And even though they think they know what their parents want, their parents influence them without the parents ever saying anything, or the parents even knowing that they're putting a load of expectations and career choices and whatever loaded onto their kids. And if you don't get some real dialogue in college planning beforehand, you end up in these bad situations. You're at the wrong school. The number of I have triplet 18-year-olds. So I hear lots of stories in addition to my own research, but the number of kids who say, I just can't tell my parents, I don't want to be the math major. I'm going into theater. I don't have to tell them when I get there. And the parents are so well-meaning and have tried everything, but the kids are having trouble facing their parents. And so instead of planning for this lifelong life sentence of a career, we're in the technology age. It's going to be 7 to 12 careers. So let's look at the starter career. Kids feel like they're undecided. They don't want to tell their parents what they really want, or they've lost track who they are, perhaps. I don't know what you found. Trying to be the ideal student for college admissions, they've lost track of what their real likes, real desires are, what their real passions are. And real planning has to happen to talk to them, get that starter career or that starter interest that will kickstart other interests and make college something that they can engage in. Okay.
Thank you, Christy. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. John or Kim, you want to say anything to that?
I'll just jump in here. I think, you're talking about parental expectations. I think that's one of the reasons, John, I guess you might agree with this, that our young people do experience so much anxiety. It's really unfair to the child, I think, to put your own hopes and dreams for them on them. That's a heavy burden to share. And of course, I'm always going to connect things back to reading, but I do think that one of the gifts of reading is that it awakens the inner life and the sense of self. When a child falls in love with reading and throughout their developmental years, they're following, their own inclinations in terms of what they're interested in reading. I think books can have an amazing ability to unlock the potential of a person and what they can do. I'm thinking of, she just slipped my mind. Jane, the British woman who just won the Templeton, worked with the chimpanzees.
Jane Goodall.
Thank you, Jane Goodall. I talk about her in my talks all the time because she is such a great example of finding her calling through literature. She loved books as a child, and she spent all kinds of time in a used bookstore sitting on stacks of books, and she fell in love with Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan series. And she decided at the age of 10 that she was going to go to Africa when she grew up. And you know the rest of the story. I mean, she opened up the world of animals to us in a way that we've never known before. So I just think that as parents, one of the things that we need to do is help our children find their way to themselves. And I love literature as a means of helping them do that. So.
If I could throw a thought or two in real briefly. First of all, to your point, Kim, I have worked with kids who, for whom reading has quite literally saved their lives, in that they have found somebody in some novel, whether it's a young adult novel or a fantasy novel or somewhere, something they're reading for school, and they feel like, oh, that's okay. That's an okay thing to be, or that's an okay thing to feel. Thank goodness I'm not the only one. If this isn't a book, this is a thing, you know, and this means a lot to kids, right? So they can kind of begin to mold their identities through the books that they read. And it can be literally life-saving. And I've seen that time and time again. And so I make reading frequent assignments, and every once in a while, because sometimes I think the English departments in high schools and middle schools are not always offering the most stimulating things to read. I encourage kids to read on their own. It's hard to get them to do it, but when they do, there's a magic that happens there for sure. And Christy, if I can just speak to, first of all, your book is going to be invaluable as well, my goodness. But I so agree with what you're saying about what happens with young people. And you said a phrase that I think we don't want to miss. Parents by and large, I don't think many of us can say we know many parents who don't have the best of intentions, right? Who don't have their kids' best intentions in mind and don't want the very best things for their kids. Sometimes though, what we fail to do is to take a step back and think about, like, what are my own fears about what my child's going through? What's my ego telling me? What am I judging my child for what he or she wants to be versus what I think they should be? What bumper sticker do I want on the back of the car that he or she is not letting me put on the back of the car, you know? So I think it's important to pause as parents, even in the best of circumstances, with the best of intentions, and give yourself a break from all those things. Really attend to your child and consider, what is it they need? What is it they need from me? And what is it they need from me right now? And the other point I love that you pointed out, and I want to highlight, is most of us in my generation, we were likely to have a career or two. In our kids' generations, I think you said 7 to 12. That's about the numbers I've come up with as well. So our kids don't need to know what they're doing with the rest of their lives. They, even when they're starting college, you know, if we can take that pressure off and say, you know what, all you need to do is see the first stair, you know, like there's going to be other stairs. Some of those stairs might not exist yet. That's okay. So to take a lot of that pressure off and let them know that your career is going to evolve, and it doesn't have to look like mine, mom, or mine, dad. You know, it's going to be uniquely yours, and we want it to be uniquely yours. That's where you're going to find success and happiness. So I appreciate that.
Just if I,
let's have Bree jump, and then we'll go to you, Christy. Sorry.
Sure, no worries.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christy. As someone, as a young and fresh out of the education system, I definitely had that kind of conversation going off of Kim and then John and then Christy on what my education was going to look like. Like, ever since I was little, I wanted to work with books, and I was just like, I want to study English and writing. And my parents were like, is that a career, or you just want to put student loans on like your major and stuff? And back when they were in college, there wasn't a lot of career options for English majors. So there were just like questions and being like, oh, do you have a backup plan? Are there any areas like teaching or journalism that you want to fall into? I'm like, no, I kind of want to do books. So they kind of like processed that, and they're like, okay, she wants to work with books. She wants to study English. So they kind of like took that in, and then they started helping me like look for options to do, such as like book publishing and then reviews and stuff, and trying to find like more experience that I can get all in different like book areas. And they're just like, we're going to make sure that you get as much experience and education on this so you can do like the best out of your education out of your English major. And so yeah, without them, I wouldn't be here today. So
Well, that's
thanks, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, super supportive.
Yeah, they're really great. I love them. So hi, Mom. Hi, Dad.
Bree, let me ask you to that point. Was there a particular way that they did that you didn't feel like they were taking over or, you know, controlling the situation?
Not really. They did take me like different paths. Like they were like, oh, you want to, maybe if you want, you could do like a different kind of job in writing or editing. Maybe not in books, but they did want to let me have that kind of creative direction in my career. Because they know I love to write and read. So they wanted to make sure I got into a job that took my passions and made like a job out of it and something I can enjoy for years. So
Wow. Yay, thank them for us. We're glad you're here with us.
Yeah, happy to be here. So
Christy.
A lot of in the last 10 years, schools, high schools, departments of education, every state has a website known as Pathways. They call it different things where you can put in those interests and you can see how you could get into different careers, how you can transition to other ones really easy. It's in my book. You can look at a chart and see where you can go from a high school diploma to a PhD in different careers with different interests. And a lot of parents say, oh, I don't want my baby who's in college to think about a career. He can do anything at the end. No, think about the career. It takes you beyond high school. It gives you a healthier worldview and it helps you get back to what the student really wants and can do. I was also just going to make a little point about we've got to get off this elitist track when it's undergrad education. You've got to go to the best school. So everybody who isn't in Harvard thinks, oh, I'm just at UPenn or I'm just at the selective school, I'm just at the state school. Everybody feels bad about what they're doing. And at the undergrad level, we've got to get over that sort of thing. And it's causing a lot of debt. It's all the wrong rules are in place. It's a whole new, completely new world of assembling a college education. Everybody needs college. Some college, lots of college. Everybody will have loads of college by the end. But it's a new world.
Thank you, Christy.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Thanks, Christy. Brenda, I'm wondering if you want to jump in. I always love to hear from you about what you think about this and how you found these
certainly. Yeah, well, I'll talk about how I found the authors and then it'll lead us into it. So I like Jane Goodall, I just started reading as a kid and never turned back. And I liked fantasy. I actually liked Edgar Rice Burroughs as well, but Tolkien stole my heart forever. I could never have done the chimpanzee thing because I hate camping, but I love books. So then when both John and Kim have really great agents, and the minute the agent presented her book, I was like, oh my God, how great it is. Books are for kids and their minds, and that parents need to read to their kids. 100,000%. Yeah, so I'm completely on board with her mission, and I'm glad that I'm in book publishing and that we're starting to do children's too. So we have things that parents will want to read to their kids. And I have to say that not to go political or anything, but when there's crazy stuff happening in our country and globally and people making decisions that go against their own best livelihood and best interests, I always think it's when the kids stopped reading as much, their faculty, their facility for critical thinking just eroded. And I honestly think I honestly believe the reason we have the problems we have, even the amount of COVID and everything, is because people read less. I believe that. And you will never convince me otherwise. And then John actually is from my previous gigs. So I'm so happy to be working with him at Mango as well. He had a great agent, and So like, I am not a mom, but I'm an aunt. And like at the time, I mean, like up until like 2 years ago, like COVID, I spent like at least one night with my best friend and her two daughters. We had dinner, we watched trash TV. They actually introduced me to books they were reading and asked me to read with them. I was like so honored, like I would nearly cry every time. And they introduced me to like Rick Riordan and all kinds of cool stuff. But like I noticed, like as they got from like little kids to like middle school and then into high school, they were under such intense pressure and they were overscheduled, and like, you know, like depression started flaring up. And so like as a, you know, I was like, oh my God, like Dr. John Duffy is desperately needed, like more John Duffy. So we still need more John Duffy too. But in any case, like you know, I saw that in my own life, like just like how like, you know, different it is for teens and tweens now and kids like than it was when I was growing up. And it's, maybe it's, as Christy says, it's a different world. Like maybe it's like, maybe like every 3 years, it's a different world. So how do we navigate that? Mm-hmm. But yes, books make everything better. I believe that.
I agree, Brenda. I think they can be sort of an anchor during all these changes and transition. Mm-hmm. There's something sort of eternal about books that can, you know, help us navigate. Life is changing so rapidly. And I agree. I just think a lot of societal issues would be solved with reading.
Well, I agree as well. You know, our kids' lives are so haphazard that I think, you know, I don't know, I read every night just to kind of ground myself into a story or somebody's way of thinking, trying to learn something new. And I'm trying to get a lot of the young people I work with to do the same, because I think it's so important. And a couple of years ago, I was working with this 16-year-old boy who was a brilliant kid and a terrible student. But he told me that he was talking about, he wanted to reform the education system, and this the gall of a 16-year-old, but it was brilliant. And he said effectively, he said, we have access to all the information. So if my English class wants me to learn about Edgar Allan Poe, let me know that. I'll put together a PowerPoint tonight based on what I learn online, and I'll be able to do that presentation by myself. Just have us do it. But his broader point was, we're pulling in so much information all the time. What we need to learn is discernment. We need to be able to think smart and be able to tease truth from fiction, and, you know, and think for ourselves. And I don't know anything that teaches us to do that, teaches young people to do that better than reading, especially reading something you're unfamiliar with. I always love it when I'm working with a young person who's reading about a different culture or, you know, some way of thinking that is different than what they are used to, or growing up here in the Chicagoland area.
Wow, I love this. I love this. And you know, I wanted to bring in Kim. You and I had a short conversation last week, and I hope it's okay that I say this. I think so, because it's pretty much what your book is about, which is that when we develop that relationship with our children, they have their own relationship with reading, and we have ours, but that we can meet about that for the rest of our lives. You know, and I was saying to Kim, you know, my son has always been an avid reader. My mom is an avid reader. And even though I live across the country from my mom, she sends me books. I send her books. We talk about them. It's been a huge way to stay connected and to keep our relationship alive. Mm-hmm. And so.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, I think we were talking about, I was telling you about my relationship with my adult son and how we trade books back and forth. And I have to say, you know, I think what happened in our relationship is he grew, you know, his interests went in a certain direction, and that impacted me, and his interests in certain kinds of literature or subjects or whatever, you know, it has enriched my life in terms of history and I don't know if any of you read Eric Larson's great nonfiction narrative books, but we trade those back and forth and talk about those all the time. And yeah, I think that books, as you say, either with your child or with your friends, can be an incredibly rich source of connection for us. Because you're meeting each other, but you're also bringing in this wider world of the book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You know, it's expanding you both in a way that is so fulfilling. So yeah, connection, it can happen.
I love that. I love that.
And
Krishna,
I think it can help bridge some of the pain of these separations we've been talking about too. You know, I encourage, you know, parents in my book, as your child gets older and is reading their own things in high school or even into college or whatever, you know, one of the things that you can talk to them about is, tell me about what you're reading, you know, sometimes even reading some of the same books, if you want to, can be a point of connection too, because yeah, they're separating, they're growing, and they're growing up in their own ways and separating from you. And it can be a really life-giving way, I think, to stay connected.
I love that, Kim. And it just brought up for me that I think that might be another piece of, at least currently, when we're talking about someone going off to college, right? So when my son was at home, he would love to pass on his books, like, hey, you need to read this, you know, and of course, his dad and I loved it, right? It was wonderful. But now when they're off in their own world, so maybe either of you could talk a little bit about that. Yeah, so we're talking about staying connected through literature, through books. But how do we do that when they're away without feeling like we're trying to, you know, hold on to them?
Well, I'll speak to this from based on some of the families that I work with. I usually encourage parents, you know, to pay attention to what their kids pay attention to. And a lot of parents will say, well, they're playing video games or they're listening to rap music, and I don't like any of that. And I always encourage parents like, yeah, I'm not thrilled with that answer. I would prefer that you at least participate with them, listen. And I've had parents come up with the most clever interventions that I never would have come up with. I worked with a father and son who were both into music, very different music. And eventually the dad said, all right, we'll do this. You get a song, then I'll play a song. And then you play, and then we'll talk about like how we feel about each other's music. And I've worked with now some de facto family book clubs where, you know, even with kids who are in college, like, you know, hey, we're all reading this here, so we want you to read that at college, and we'll talk Sunday night a little bit about where we are and how it's going and what we think. But I found some things happen fairly organically in reading. I grew up not a huge baseball fan, and somehow my son came from some other planet because he is this enormous baseball fan. So I had to learn about baseball. And so he gave me a couple of books on the basics, and he had me read The Art of Fielding, which is this lovely baseball novel. And now we trade articles almost every day about how our hapless Chicago Cubs can't seem to get it together. And but we're reading and we're sharing about what we read. And then we'll share another article from another source about another team. And, you know, and then all of a sudden our reading and our connection, the difference between them is indecipherable, you know, like they're the same thing. And it's one of the great joys of my life. And so I'm encouraging this more and more and more. Hey, Brenda just wrote, "Go San Francisco Giants." The only reason that I'm going to make a thing of this is the Giants are doing very well because they borrowed one of our players, Brenda.
Chris Bryant,
KB. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
You're very welcome. Anytime. In any event, I think this is a great way for parents and kids to connect, whether it's books, whether it's articles, whether it's music, whether it is, even if it's video games, or it is something that is a little less more irreverent. My niece and her mom, my sister-in-law, they both watch The Bachelor, which is something I can't stand, but they love it and they connect through it. So there's any element, any form of connection that you can find, I encourage you to follow that line instead of cutting off something because it doesn't appeal to you at first glance.
I love that, John. I really love everything that you just said. Even if you are a Cubs fan, my St. Louis Cardinals are arch enemies.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Sorry.
I can't win here.
What I was thinking about what you said is that, you know, so often we're sort of put off by the things they're interested in, whether it's video games or The Bachelor or whatever. And I think that sometimes if we just take a step closer and say, to ask them or to look into, well, what is it about that gets you? Because I mean, that's a question of great respect. You know, you have to assume that there's something in it there that's worthwhile of their attention and their time. And so kind of taking the opportunity to explore further and give it a chance can be a wonderful thing. I mean, children can open up worlds to us, like you were talking about with your son in baseball. I mean, it's I think one of the greatest things about being a parent or an aunt or, you know, anybody that's closely related to a child or a relative. They open our worlds up.
They do. And I think we underestimate the degree to which we don't know their worlds, and that we can learn so much from them about how things work. You know, like the devices that we're all looking into right now. Any child knows more than any of us about all these devices, right? You know,
Yes.
And all the different types of social media, and, you know, and why they're drawn to it. And, you know, like one of the constant wars in my room is about rap music. Why are you listening to this vulgar rap music? But if you do take that step back, or that step toward, I think you suggested a step toward, and you actually listen and you ask, like, okay, so what does this mean to you? You might find, oh, that's what Springsteen means to me, you know, like, and suddenly you have these connections that you can draw, you know, and I think we don't want to miss the opportunities for those connections just because we're not the experts. You know, because sometimes our kids are the experts, more often than not, now more than ever.
Wow, I love this so much. What was just flying through my mind is that, you know, we started talking about COVID and anxiety and, you know, parents being sad and kids being stressed. And I love like that what happened was that this conversation about connection. And, you know, I'm really feeling it as I'm listening to you and to everyone who's here, that sense of solid ground that we get through connection. And whether it's, you know, the connection we have with our children, the connection we have with our parents, the connection we have with books, and like how much that can give all of us this sense of solid ground in a time when everything seems like it's uncertain. Which makes me want to thank you, Brenda, right here. I know we usually wait till the end, but I just feel, you know, the fact that you choose these authors to bring their wisdom to the world, to offer, you know, this sense of stability and possibility to the world. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, I wish I was bringing more stability. Let's just put it that way.
Well, we do.
I'm working on it.
We have just about 6 minutes left, and I know I got so excited to just like jump into the conversation. I know John and Kim, you both brought a little something to read. Does it feel like that's appropriate at the moment? Do you want to share a little bit from your books? And or if that doesn't feel like something you want to do right now, it'd also be great just to hear if you have any thoughts on anything that maybe we didn't touch into that feels really important to this conversation.
I'll throw out, and I will, in lieu of reading an excerpt, I'll just toss out kind of an underlying theme about parenting that I want parents to hold on to. Parenting has become such a verb. It's become, I think, what we consider really important work. And I think that's all very, very true, right? And we're very active now as parents. What I fear gets lost now because of the anxieties that we have about our kids is, first of all, how transmissible those anxieties are. In other words, if we're real anxious about the lives of our kids, they are going to catch that, you know? So the calmer we can be at home and in different environments, and the more gentle tone that we can bring to their very harried, hectic, busy, unpredictable lives, the better. The other thing is not to forget that parenting is the greatest joy of our lives too. And to build a little bit on the theme we were talking about a minute ago, we can learn so much from our kids. And I think we're the first generation that probably has to learn more from our kids about being kids than any other generation. In other words, I think our parents were able to dictate, here's what you do as a kid. You go out, you play kick it can, you come in for dinner, you know, like, and they were able to dictate, like, this is what your life is going to look like, and we will determine that. And if it goes outside these bounds, we will punish accordingly. And our kids' lives don't work like that anymore. Oftentimes they're upstairs behind closed doors, or they're down the street, or there are AirPods in their ears. And we want to enter those worlds a little bit, you know, not all the way. They're entitled to have their degree of privacy. But if you enter that world, there is joy on the other end if you go in there with an open mind, and your life becomes bigger and more expansive and more enjoyable.
Ah, love that. Amen, John. That was great. That was really great. Kim, what about you? Do you want to read us a little bit, or do you have something?
Yeah, well, it's funny, the passage that you chose was the one that I was originally thinking about reading. And then I thought, well, that's too long. And I was going to read this very brief description of the first day of kindergarten, because it just felt to me that it's really not so different from the first day of college, you know? So I could read that, but I just want to kind of piggyback on what John had to say, which occurred to me as I reflect on being a parent myself, and what I wrote about in the book as well. When, you know, when you're a parent, I mean, I think you're confronted with your own parenting. In other words, the anxieties that we bring to our children generally are coming right from the way that we were parented. And I think, you know, what you're saying, John, is we really do have to kind of reflect on, there's just no getting around it. If we want to be honest and really help our children, we have to sort of look back. So anyway, I so appreciate that thought, but I'll just share this little bit with you if you.
Yeah, please do. Please.
Okay. So this comes from chapter 3 of my book, Kindergarten and the Invisible Toolbox, Discovering the Tools Inside. I've already sort of explained the invisible toolbox has to do with this sort of internal infrastructure that we gift our children when we read and speak to them from the start. And so here it is. And so we can think of this maybe in terms of all the transitions we're talking about. The first day of kindergarten may be one of the most emotional days in the life of a parent. Even if a child has had preschool experience, day one of kindergarten is different because it represents a child's first real launch into the wider world of school and life beyond you. It is a day marked with the ritual of new clothes, new shoes, a new lunchbox, and a first day of school picture. And what I'm thinking of now are all the parents that are buying for the dorm rooms, Bed Bath & Beyond, and there's no difference when you think about it.
That's so great.
My son's kindergarten picture was taken at the front door of our house. Today, I look at this photo of him with his brand spanking new clothes and sneakers, Winnie the Pooh lunchbox in hand, a bright expectant smile on his face, and 1 foot raised as if poised to take a step forward, and still get a lump in my throat. I also remember my underlying anxiety that day. Is he ready? Will his teacher be kind? Will he make friends? As parents, we know this is a significant day, and for good reason. The launch of our child's school career that will span 13 years has arrived, and all of our hopes, dreams, and expectations that we have for our child are wrapped up in it. As we watch them walk away from us up the path to the kindergarten gate to their welcoming teacher, we pray that they are ready, that the experience will be wonderful, and that this will be the day, this day will be the first of a long and successful school career. I would venture to say that all well-meaning parents share this hope. Yet there is something else in the picture of which we may not be aware. A child walks through the kindergarten gate with a lunchbox in one hand and an invisible toolbox in the other. And in that toolbox, there are resources that will affect their success or failure in school for years to come. By reading to your child from birth, you can ensure your child will be well equipped with these essential tools. So I guess the reason, one of the reasons I wanted to go ahead and share that is because I think it does sort of encapsulate everything we've been talking about in terms of the going forward and how really what we've built with our children in terms of the connection is what will enable them to make that launch and to be okay.
Oh, and Kim, I got a little teary there while you were reading. That was perfect, and I love that we ended with it. That was absolutely perfect.
There's really no difference, is there, when you think about it? Sherry, with what your son going off, and I just think sometimes life is just this series of saying goodbye and hoping for the best and returning, and just all these cycles that are fraught. So
and I just really truly want to thank both of you. I just feel like you both just showed up totally in the moment for whatever this conversation brought, and it feels to me that the places that you were so powerful, so important. I was jotting down notes the whole time. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And thank you, Mango Publishing. Wow, do we love you. Thank you to everyone who was here. So appreciate seeing you here today. It really matters. We love your energy. We're here every Wednesday. Come back and see us.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.